Okay, my friends, this is another shocker du jour, even on me. I decided I would search every different place I could possibly for evidence of how everything developed, the origins of humanity. And I thought I was really getting somewhere, and I decided I would look into the Annunaki and Zecharia Sitchin, and wow. All I can say right now is wow. Now we're going to go over Sitchin's interpretation of these ancient Sumerian texts and the Anunnaki who came to Earth and engineered humans. And I'm going to tell you right now, I have got a ton of different human-ish feet. And that's a foot, and that's a foot, and I got other ones. Now, I wrote this paper back in 2015 about what was written in the history. At that time, I just sort of laid it out there as much as I knew. But I did know that Ovid and so forth wrote about metamorphosis, and they changed creatures into the natural landscape. And that's the first two lines of his epic poem, they called it. 12,000 lines of all the ancient myth. And he said the one thing that was the most important that you understand is these gods controlled matter. They could say, boop, you're a mountain. And you turned into a mountain. They were planets. They could come down to change themselves from being a planet into being a hot-looking god and having sex with human women, and then the women had kids that grew up to miles tall. All this stuff now is fairly well understood to be true. And I have evidence that shows this may very well be, and this really caught my eye, 3,600-year orbital. Let's talk about this, because this is, like I said, this is a shocker for me. I did not expect to find this. And I'm still digging into it. So if you want to dig in, get ready. Okay, my friends, this is staggering. Zecharia Sitchin fought against the establishment, just as Velikovsky did, just as I'm doing, based on evidence that he had. Now, what evidence? Well, the Sumerian texts. And he translated them and interpreted them. And these Sumerian were talking about the Anunnaki and how they came to Earth and engineered human beings. And I have those engineered body parts that are human-ish, but not exactly the same as ours. They have springs in their feet and all kinds of, look at the size, that's a foot. That is a foot, my friends. It's got the arch. Right there is where the bone settled in. This is where the fibula sat right in there. The tibia was here. Look at the damn thing. This is a foot as well. And I have all kinds of stuff I'm going to show you. I call them no-toes, because the toes are built into them. This is the hide of this foot. These are engineered gloop, 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 gloop foot. Ours are very, very articulated. They advanced the design. It looks to me, I could be totally wrong, but I'm going to show you my evidence. And Zecharia Sitchin, as far as I'm concerned, falls into my hero list. Velikovsky's always going to be on top, but I'm thinking I might have a new one just underneath. We'll find out. All right, let's learn about Sitchin together, my friends. He died in 2010, so he's been gone 15 years. But he tried to explain the human origins involving ancient astronauts who are coming through space on a 3,600-year orbital, to go out, and then it skims back, which we have seen these things, Halley's Comet and so forth. They all do that same sort of thing. Now, this is supposedly 3,600 years, and the planet is called Nibiru. How big it is, I don't know. I'm just learning, just as you are, unless you know about it. And I not too many people do. My friend Paul did write a book about the Anunnaki. That's his like I say, I'm not involved in these books at all. This is just related to my paper. He also writes his own books that have nothing to do with me. And one of them was about the Anunnaki. I did not read it yet, but he's got these. They're very inexpensive. And they're nice little coffee table books, maybe a Christmas present, who knows what. Now, this guy, Zecharia Sitchin, has a number of books, and he proposed this explanation. He attributed the creation of the Sumerian culture to the Anunnaki, which he claimed was a race of extraterrestrials from a planet beyond Neptune called Nibiru. All right? And he died 2010. Now, what did he propose? Let's see what he actually did propose. All right, this is the key right here. Sitchin's theories, well, about the human origins, he was a translator of these ancient texts. And these were well documented, I think. We're going to find out. He claimed the Anunnaki genetically engineered modern humans and that Sumerian myths contained factual accounts. And his detailed argument was in this book. And these beings visited Earth on a 3,600-year orbital cycle and played a role in development of civilization. Well, let's talk about that. All right, these are his claims. A race of extraterrestrials from Nibiru, and it's an elongated 3,600-year elliptical orbit around and comes back close to the sun. And that was all written apparently in Sumerian mythology, which they call it mythology. Human origins. Now, Sitchin asserted the Anunnaki genetically modified ancient hominids to create modern humans. As I have always said, DNA is nothing more than a program. You can program DNA, and the bacteria do all the job. Bacteria do everything. Those are the things that are the programmers, and once you program them, they just do what they're supposed to do. So they genetically modified ancient hominids to create modern humans. Now, I have shown these different feet, these different styles of feet and different organs and all that kind of stuff over and over and over. And all of the ancient giant, well, here's these feet right here, and all of these ancient petrified creatures, body parts. And they're right out in the open. Nobody pays attention. That's a heel stone at Stonehenge. It's a foot. It's a foot. Those two little spots at the end of each one of these toes is where the terminus is. That means the red blood goes out and the black blood comes back up to be recycled. It died laying flat on this side, which all of them have, well, not all of them, but pretty much all of them have a very flat side like that, because they died in the flood. And this has the heart, aorta. So the heart was there when it died. See, that's where the aortic arch sits, right behind the left lung. And this was DNA tested and CAT scanned. And you can get DNA out of these, no problem. And you don't get it off the surface. You go down deep inside. So none of that stuff. You know, they always make all these, oh, the guy must have done this, this can't happen, this isn't over, this is all wrong. No. It's available to test. And we tried to get somebody to test this, and I did a whole bunch of these. I got them all ready, bagged up, and ready to go, and nobody will do it that we can find. And anyway, that right there, I would say, is the vein, the black. Somebody could walk up to this thing. I mean, it's right there. It's right next to the road. And it's the heel stone. This has just been avoided. And these are just gigantic things. Nobody can explain that, so they stay away. Right there, that's where the bone came down. And that's where this is the tibia, and that's the fibula. And the two bones come together and make the foot. That's very large compared to ours. And of course, I always show my hair follicle. There's the muscle attachment, the sebaceous gland, the root, the papilla, the hair shaft. 2 inches wide. And I got other ones, and I got some DNA tested, 3 foot long fingertip. The tip, just the tip, 3 feet long. Fingernails on it, fingerprints, everything. Now, so I got all of this stuff to back me up. And I think I showed you, or will, that's the Earth. And it's made, the Earth is basically a creature, or was made of creatures, or is a body of some sort, or bodies. I know it's covered with bodies. What was underneath? Was this it? I don't know. But this is the Grand Canyon, and I know how that formed too. But let's look at what Sitchin has to say. I've shown this stuff over and over and over, and it's primarily rejected. The same thing they did with Sitchin, and they're going to say he's a pseudoscientist. Same thing they say about Velikovsky. These people did the research. Not the ones that they're going against them. Don't even read them. They don't. They have no even idea what they said. I'm not kidding you. When they banned the book for Velikovsky, they actually made the publisher take it off the bookshelves after it being #1 on the New York Times bestseller list, #1 for 11 weeks in a row. And the academics said, if you don't take it off the bookshelves, we'll never buy another book from you. And that was Macmillan Publishers, so they told them that, so they took it off the bookshelves. And you know, that's how academia responded. Now, when they went to interview the guy that was the head of getting rid of it, they said, well, what didn't you like about the book? And he said, well, I wouldn't read trash like that. So he never even read it. And then you had Carl Sagan attacking Velikovsky viciously, nasty, arrogant. Oh, he was just, made me want to vomit. You know, I don't like to talk nasty about people that certainly can't fight back. He's passed away, but trust me, it wasn't nice. Anyway, we're gonna, and I'm sure he would have done the same, or maybe he did do the same thing with Sitchin, because Sitchin was writing these books probably about the same time. Well, that's a good question. I wonder if he did attack Sitchin. Now, Sagan had the TV show Cosmos, and here he is, he would criticize Sitchin. Arguments against pseudoscience were intended to refute the entire premise, which included Sitchin's claims. And he just said a general rebuttal to ancient astronaut theory, and he made all kinds of books, and he was on TV and all this stuff. Ancient humans were too stupid to create these monumental architecture on their own. And he goes on condemnation of pseudoscientific thinking. You know, in other words, you people are idiots. Now that was him against Sitchin. Now watch this. You know, I watched Sagan arrogantly attack Velikovsky, and it says here Sagan's role in the controversy. Because they were against, everybody was against Velikovsky. So Sagan's critique of Velikovsky prominently featured in the book Scientists Confront Velikovsky. A collection of papers from the AAAS Symposium dissected Velikovsky's theories on physical, astronomical, archaeological, and historical grounds. Sagan's work helped to demonstrate the flaws in Velikovsky's reasoning and his disregard for established scientific consensus. In other words, he didn't agree, so he wasn't part of the crew. Now, I make of it that Velikovsky has made a lot of wrong predictions and a few right quotations. So in other words, what he said was the only thing he got right was things that other people had already said, and everything else that he made up was wrong anyway. And he was really, really critical and nasty on a real nasty note. Here it is. This is Worlds in Collision. I wrote a book 10 years ago called Minds, or called Velikovsky. Hold on a second. I can't remember now. Yeah, here it is. It's 99 cents. You just get to read it. It's on Amazon. And it's called Mudfossils, Velikovsky, and Minds in Collision. Now, he wrote Worlds in Collision, which they couldn't accept. Now, don't forget, this is in the 15th century BC. Remember that date, 15th century. That's 1500 BC. Now, this is my book about the reaction from mainstream to Velikovsky. And this goes back to 2015, somewhere around there. But anyway, this was about Velikovsky and how he was treated by academia. And his evidence is undeniable. And now it's proven now to be very, very obvious. The things that he said, I can support almost 100%. And even beyond the things that he said, he had no clue about this, that the whole world was made of, like, these are skin cells, as I showed you before, I think. And the whole world is made up of things that nobody's ever suspected, gigantic feet. There's people walking up here, there's a couple little people standing down here. That's a foot for some gigantic creature. And the Devil's Tower is the same thing. The Devil's Tower is nothing more than an Achilles tendon. That's basically what Devil's Tower is Achilles tendon. The whole foot is around it. And the stuff in space, the same thing. Asteroid Bennu is nothing but muscle, and it's coming on through space. We never expected any of this stuff. I never expected, I can tell you that right now. But I just showed you this is a foot from some creature. There's the rest of his body parts that stabilized. And you could go around and look and find all this one here, it looks to be that it was in an area where they solidified pretty good, even the bones and everything, because a lot of these I see, I believe, are bones. Very hard to tell, but this is fleshy and bony sort of stuff, and it looks like it preserved pretty well here, and that's the key. Different conditions leave you with different outcomes. Sometimes, like this lung here is almost like new. The pleura is on there, that's all the rubber bag, it's just flawless. And it had the blood coming right out of there. Right out of here. It's saturated with blood down in that area anyway. And then that one there. And then you have other lungs. Like I got one around here. So, well, this one here, half of the pleura, that rubber bag, is twisted off, but it's still flat, you see? It's because just like all these were in the flood. And they soaked them and boiled them, and then they came back together with whatever was in the area, and this was bloody, sort of muddy stuff, fleshy stuff, and it reinvaded in here and turned the whole thing into a mudstone. Just like the rock I had here somewhere. Well, they're all rocks, but some of them were bones, such as this one here. That was a bone. See? And the fascia that surrounded it, protected it. Now this one here, the fascia and all that stuff went, and then everything inside came out of it. But it's still a lung. It's basically would have been like the same as this here. But for some reason, this one just, everything washed out off of it, and everything evacuated from it. And then this one here, nothing. Even the pleura, all of the coating, the rubber bag stayed. So my point is that you can never just look at something and say, oh, it has to be a lung because it's whatever. They come in all, like even this is a lung. From whatever, I don't know what it's from, but this is a lung. And that's where the blood infused back into the lung right there. And down here, right there, is the airway. And again, I think it probably died something flat like that. And again, it's because the fascia that surrounds it kept it protected. I got lungs. I had to make my wife a rock garden. I had so many of these. This is like, what am I going to do? And I mean, I had fingertips this long. They're in the rock garden now. Lungs all over the place. This particular spot I'm in, every single thing I can find here is almost flawless, and they're to me undeniable. Absolutely undeniable. Even my buddy here, Caesar, it's a goose. You say, "Oh no, Roger, that's just a rock." I said, "No. That rock has feathers, my friends." I guess they don't do that. Whatever they do. All right, there's his little nose hole there. Now he died flat like this. And that's why you can actually see where his throat would have come, see? You get it in the right light, you can see where the throat sort of makes a different impression where it laid like this. Now, up there, that's the artery. Over there, that's the vein. And you can see the architecture of his throat right there in the... Hold on. If you look carefully, you're going to see right there, that's the dead center of his throat. It's just everything congeals. Now up there is the artery. And I did a catalase test on it, and it was positive. This side here, very hard to see the veins. It's over in here, I think right down over here somewhere. The rest of that right there, the dead center, is the center of his throat. Of course, there's his feathers. So anyway, this stuff is, it is real. Now let's get back to Sitchin. Okay, we just dismissed this, and I cannot imagine how. Sumerian tablets are ancient clay writings from Mesopotamia dating back to 3000 BC. All right, so that's 6,000 or 5,000-ish years ago. They're inscribed with wedge-shaped cuneiform script and contain records of daily life, state affairs, literature, religious stories. Many found. When I say many, wait till you hear. Only a portion have been translated. They represent one of humanity's earliest forms of writing and are notable for their durability, leading to numerous surviving examples used by scribes and merchants to document everything from commodity accounts to laws and epic poems. Now, when they say epic poems, they mean books about history. Tablets are made of clay, allowed them to preserve for thousands of years. They just never go bad. It's like dishes, clay dishes that are fired. Inscribed with cuneiform writing, these wedge-shaped characters, they just press it into the clay, and then when they fire them, they just never go bad. The tablets provide insight into Sumerian society. They cover virtually everything. And there was like hundreds of thousands, possibly millions, have been found in the region of ancient Mesopotamia. Incredibly durable, especially the ones that were fired in kilns. All right. Eventually, they deciphered these writings that allow scholars to access the vast amount of information contained on the tablets. I don't know what they consider this to be, just silly stuff written, hundreds of thousands of these things. They're talking about historical records, precursors to modern media. And then it comes out of this. With their use of a durable medium like clay laid the groundwork for later writing systems. They serve as invaluable sources of understanding history, culture, and daily lives of the Sumerians. Well, let's find out what they said. Now, this is the stuff that Sitchin studied. And these things are pretty serious. I mean, they're just flawless. So once they understood what the system of writing was, it's just sitting down and reading them. You know, and Sitchin, I guess, did that. Okay, I want to talk to some historians and linguistics, whoever they are, because Sitchin was widely rejected by mainstream historians and linguistics as pseudo-archaeology, so it's just fake, citing deliberate misinterpretations and misrepresentations of Sumerian texts and a flawed methodology. He looked at it, he examined it, he studied them. That's not flawed. Experts state that Sitchin's claims are based on misinterpretations and out-of-context quotations, not factual evidence. Well, all that I ever present is factual evidence that can be supported in any number of ways. All of this stuff is for real. This is DNA tested left human hand. It's got human DNA in it, the mother's side, mitochondrial. From here over to here, it's like 4 feet wide. That, if you put your hand back like that, you have one of those tendons right there. You go up side by side, back and forth. You can feel it, thump, thump, thump. That's the cleave in between your fingers. I mean, your pads. That's the pad. This silver stuff is what I call grip skin. It's just a really tough skin. I have fingers, I have knuckles, I have all kinds of things from that hand. And we have all of these different feet. And these, we didn't even have to dig for these. I gave what I used to call the 15-minute challenge. And I had somebody, Tish Egerton, sent me something. She says, I found a bunch of stuff. Some feet and things. And I said, wow. She sent me this picture of where she just actually picked it up off the ground. That's where the foot was. Let me show you the foot in a second. These here are bones. You see the color here? That's the transition metals that are inside the marrow, inside of the bones. So this thing at one point died and just sort of fell apart. Now, how long ago that was, I don't know, but this is right on the surface. She said she didn't do anything, she just picked it up right off of there. And what did she pick up? That right there. It's a foot. And I think that's an engineered foot, because you see this? It almost looks like a wing nut. You see it? She found all kinds of stuff. And she found the spring feet. This one here, I don't know if it's a spring foot or not. But she did have the spring one here. This one here has, these are both springs. They're not clamshells or anything. I figured out how this whole thing works. And this one loads, and then it pulls that one in. That's the heel, that's the strap, that's the tibia. The fibula would be on the other side. All of these things, and of course the skin cells that cover the earth. Every culture had the same story. The earth is made out of some kind of gigantic creatures. I can't explain any of this. All I can do is search for answers, and that's what we're going to do. I'm going to continue to do this. Okay, I'm going to sort of breeze over this a little bit, but this is Sitchin, Zachariah Sitchin. Now, he wrote all these books and was, you know, they called him a pseudoscientist, and he didn't know what he was doing. He was making up things, but he was talking about the Sumerian mythology. And he was talking about Nibiru and his 3,600-year elliptical orbit. And he had a lot of books written, 25 languages and so forth. And he taught himself this cuneiform. You see that? That's the style of writing they had, and they put them right in the cliffs and everything else. And I was looking up, and the Nabateans did the same thing. A lot of them did the same thing, and they used these cliffs because they were actually literally soft at one time. They had to be. They impressed these things into there. They just chiseled it away here, flattened it out, and then just went around and pushed the stuff in. And at one time, the earth had been flooded. And at that time is when they could do this. And they actually went and made walls out of the body parts. Okay, my friends, as you know, whenever you look up my stuff, they say, oh, he's got no evidence. Well, let's talk about this stuff here. What created that? What could have created this? And what are they doing? What's going on here? I can tell you what's happened. That's a machine, and they were using it to cut slabs to make these walls that were so perfect because they were wet when they were doing it. That machine sunk right in. And I believe this is like an anchor, and there's the ones down the other side. Hold on. All right, now I'm not sure. This, I believe, is in Bolivia. I'm not sure what this was, but I can tell you what, some kind of it looks to me like an organ. Now, it could have been a liver or who knows what. It looks to me like something drove right around here and turned and drove up here on these. You see how the outside edge here? And the whole thing rolled up here and just sunk into this when it was soft. It had to be. It sunk into here, and it looks down here like they might have done something to support it so it didn't shift here or there because it's in some wet, muddy, basically muddy, putty. And they cut these out and made the walls out of them. That's my opinion, and I can show you where those little bumps are on the walls, what caused that. All right, you see these all the time, these little bumps all over the walls. And they always say, oh, what's caused that? They put them there for, I don't know what there's all kinds of claims. But they're there because they were there when this thing was in a creature's body. And out of there came a shaft, a stalk that locked a ball into this. And I'll show you when they were alive what they look like. Now you see this? These are those bumps I'm talking about. And you see how perfectly set these things are? Not a single piece of paper could you fit in there. That's because they were wet when they put them there. They had some very good artisans. Amazing. And this stuff here that's growing, this mossy little lichen, it's attacking the blood that's in the biology here. All right, and there's other places where they cut them so that the blood is just gushing out of them. See this here? That's cut right into a bone. That's right here. You see the little bumps on them? This is really nasty area. They did some sloppy job here. But you can see, these you can't see too many bumps, but you see bumps up here, you see them? Look at that thing. They just used whatever they had left over down here, it looks like. And that one there is just falling apart, but it's strong enough to hold up that edge. Now you see that right there? This is a test wall, I'm pretty sure. And these are the bumps that we're going to be talking about. They reached over and there was a ball in place and locked this tendon in. And it could move this way. These were all the same tendon. This scraped flat. This, they left the bumps sticking up. This one, they cut it down to where there's a fabric there that's just like this. They didn't cut that special or anything. That's just the fabric as they chisel it back. This one's cut similar to that. This, I don't know what's going on there. Anyway, I think this must have been a test wall. What else? Why would you do this? But you can see right there, you see that? That right there is one of those straps. And you can actually see inside the strap. And outside, surrounding it, is the fleshy stuff, the cord-like stuff. So you say, oh, Roger, you said you were going to show us the source of all these bumps. Well, I will. Here it is right here. These are tendons. They're called, it's the flat tendon, aponeurosis tendon. Now, you see these little holes here? That little hole, there's got a hole here, there's a hole here. Well, the strap comes over, it goes down through that little tiny hole, and the ball locks in here. This is an injury. All right, that's ripped out. Not supposed to be. It's supposed to be locked in there. That's painful. Now, when it's in here, you can do this. You got something to grab onto so you can pull and so forth with your girdle of aponeurosis tendon. That's the girdle that surrounds your body. It's the flat tendon. There's other ones, rope tendon, that go for your legs and all that stuff. This is different. This is your girdling tendon. And it's just flat, and it's tough as hell. Tough. All they did was break them off right here. And they used a flat plate, and they just left the bumps sticking out. You see, they just left the bumps sticking out. And you say, oh, Roger, look at the size of those. That's impossible. I said, no, it's not. It's not impossible at all. You want to see how big they can get? That's one right there. Coming down to a ball that was stuck in to flesh that was about this thick. That's just eroded away. For sometimes the flesh erodes away, sometimes the tendon erodes away. Depends on the pH, the temperature, the solvents that were in, if they were alkaline or acid, whatever. But this is the ball, and that is the strap. And all this stuff is biology up here. You see all these little pockets and things? That's layers of tissue. And this ball would have come right up to about here. And that that strap runs right up. And there was another one right here, it looks to me. And that was the center core of it coming down. And I believe the ball is right there. But there was another one right over here. That's one right here. There was a zillion of them in these tendons. They're all over the place. This is just one. Then there's going to be another set and another set and another set. They're not just one set. They're all over the place. Because that's how it's got to anchor your whole girdle of your body with this tendon. Those tendons are tough. Then there's these other type of tendons, which are the rope style. That's an Achilles tendon, but they have those there too. Here's the Achilles ones. You see that? That's the Achilles tendon right there. And they were cutting this up, making these walls back here. You see it? This is Achilles tendon. Here's Achilles tendon from a live, or not alive, but recently alive person. That right there is abrupt transition. They come up a certain distance and then they abruptly transition into a less, I don't know, they just change. That is the heel, the calcaneus heel. This, what we're looking at, was that stuff running over the mountain. It is what it is. Now, you can just reject it and say, oh, Roger, that's just impossible. It's just crazy. Well, I didn't say it's crazy. I didn't say it isn't crazy. It's crazy. It's about as crazy as you can get, but it's true. When something's true, it's true. I don't care if it's crazy, it's not crazy. And they had other machines here other than this thing here. You see this? They were cutting something, these slabs, and moving them down. Well, they were still wet. That's why when they get put together, they're just gooped like big balls of putty. But they must have had some people that were extremely gifted the way they could do this. Look at that. And a lot of them did it not just because it was easy, the cut was that size. They did it to make it really artful. I mean, they had some just all kinds of perfectly gorgeous, gorgeous stuff. So they were artisans. But they had machines. And here's another one. This is like from a 4-wheel drive machine. You see that? This is the tire. You see these? These are like the same things we use on the rovers. These 4-wheel drive looking things. That is the side of an Achilles tendon. This is an Achilles tendon from the same area, I think, as the other ones. All right, now, I think I've shown quite a bit to support my claims. I don't think they did this with chisels. They had equipment here. What they were doing, why they were building these walls, I can't tell you. I have no idea. But I do know this was all biology, and these creatures died, I would say, just recently to that particular time after the Great Flood. And they were still in a degree of moisture where they could be worked. And there was giants here not that long ago. They're showing these, they were being attended to by the people on Earth. Now, were they the Sumerians? They look like Egyptians to me. There's another one around here somewhere. These, to me, clearly these were Egyptians. Now, were the Egyptians related to the Sumerians? I believe they were right after the Sumerians, I think. They were one of the earliest cultures, and they were obviously giants, some of them. All right, they were pretty close together. Sumer and ancient Egypt were distinct Bronze Age civilizations. They say that Sumer, they believe, came a little earlier than Egypt, and they had a different outlook on life, which could be an interesting thing. Sumer came earlier than Egypt, and Sumer was more pessimistic about life than Egypt was. Egypt had a happy looking, a good look, like a positive outlook on the afterlife. So it says the Sumer was a collection of independent city-states, each one of them with a pessimistic view of the afterlife. Egypt was a unified kingdom. They were under one big king with a positive outlook on the afterlife, ruled by a godlike pharaoh. Now, the Egyptians had the Book of the Dead. And I really haven't studied that or looked into it hardly at all. But when you start looking into the Gnostic texts, the Book of the Dead makes perfect sense. Because when you hear about what Jesus came to teach his disciples about the afterlife, it's just stunning. It takes like 4 or 5 minutes just to state the topics of all of the different aeons and the regions and the spheres and the servitors and the layers of light and the layers of chaos and darkness, and just on and on and on and on and on, of things that he had to teach the disciples. Now, whether you have to learn all those things to get out, I don't know. But something's going on here, and it's more than we've been taught, my friends. This stuff was serious. This was not just a bunch of people being crazy. Now, this is what it says about Enki and Enlil and the Great Flood. The gods had decided to destroy humanity with a flood. The god Enki, who did not agree with the decree, revealed it to Zasudra, a man well known for his humility and obedience. Zasudra did as Enki commanded and built a huge boat, which was the ark, in which he successfully rode out the flood. There's a bunch of stories about this, and some of them use the name Prometheus as the builder of humans. He molded them out of clay. That was what was said. And he had a son, and I think his grandson was Noah, and they're saying that this guy Zasudra was the guy that created the ark. Well, the other ones have Noah, and the other ones have Deucalion, but it's pretty much the same story. Okay, this is pretty long about Gilgamesh and so forth, but here's something I found very interesting. Afterwards, his friend died, and they had a state funeral for him, Enkidu. And afterward, Gilgamesh makes a dangerous journey in search of Utapistum, the survivor of the Babylonian flood. So this is after the flood. Gilgamesh is searching for this Utanapistum, who was a survivor of the Babylonian flood. To me, the Babylonian flood was the Great Flood. All right, there seems to be a hell of a lot of confusion about these floods. This one's saying the Great Flood story originated with the Sumerians, though it was later developed into the Babylonian version found in the Epic of Gilgamesh. The oldest surviving Mesopotamian flood narrative is the Sumerian epic of Zasudra. And I think that's the one. There was the Great Flood, and I don't think it was that long ago. And it says it predates the Babylonian version, like the Epic of Gilgamesh and the Epic of Atrahasis. The biblical story of Noah's Ark is believed to be based on these later Mesopotamian accounts. On these later Mesopotamian accounts, not earlier. So the biblical story of Noah's Ark is believed to be based on the later Mesopotamian accounts. That's interesting, what they mean by that. It says the earliest flood myth comes from the Sumerian culture, where it features the hero Zasudra, who survives the divine flood sent to destroy humanity. And I'm pretty sure that was when Venus hit Earth, and that was not that long ago. According to Velikovsky, it was just like 1500 BC, and maybe not even, maybe 1300 BC. And then there was another event as well. But there was a time when there was ages in chaos, and then the sea peoples showed up from who knows where. They were the survivors that somehow got back together. They were probably the Atlanteans, who were the sea. They owned basically the sea, the people from Atlantis. And I believe they got back together and they came back on the scene. I think it was around 800 BC, something like that. Hold on a second. Well, if they're right, I was way off. They're talking about the sea peoples. This is right after the Great Flood. They were roughly 1276 to 1178. You know, how they come up with these dates. And some early mentions of their constitution tribes appear in earlier Egyptian Amarna letters from the mid to late 14th century. Wow. Primarily known for their attacks on coastal cities, including the Hittite Empire and the pharaohs in 1170 BC. This would have been right after the Great Flood and the ages of chaos. I don't know how so many people could have survived this Great Flood. It was intended to wipe out humanity. Now, it took care of the giants, but the normal-sized people, somehow, a lot of them seem to have survived. Now, Sitchin claims to have decoded that it said it passed by Earth every 3,600 years or so. Now, he's saying it had previously passed by in 556 BC, and it would return around 2900. Well, we're at 2225. All right, Sitchin was saying that this Nibiru passed by here in 556 BC. It had come back around 2900, which gives it about 3,500 years or so. And there's no scientific data, yada, yada. Well, maybe there isn't. So, but let's think about if it was 3,600 years. If it's 3,600 is correct, and Sitchin says he decoded these texts and found out it was a 3,600 year elliptical orbit. If that is correct, and the flood was caused during this event, which may or may not be the case, but if it was, Velikovsky puts the event of the flood at about, I believe he said 1300, maybe 1500 BC. If you add that to 2000 AD, you get 3,500 years, 3,600 years. And that's what he said is the orbital cycle. So, and there's things coming in here, this 3-eye atlas. And I had heard from some other sources that there are more than just that one particular one coming in. And they say that was from outside of our solar system. Well, 3,600 year, reoccurrence, it's a planet. So they could characterize it that way. I don't know. You'd think they would have been able to see something by now if the whole planet was coming back, but I just don't know what to think anymore. I really don't. Because there's so much unscientific. See, this is why the concept popular, but unscientific. Well, there is scientific, it means very, very little to me now. When they say, oh, you got to have scientific, you got to have peer review, science this, science that. Well, let's take the actual artifacts. And then talk to me about science. I've shown all this stuff. I've shown all my giants, the DNA tested, CAT scan, the whole 9 yards. And then they say, oh, you got to have science, you got to have science. No, you don't. You got to open your eyes. Pay attention to the things that you have to confront. If you don't confront them, you're not a scientist. You're just somebody repeating something they told you to say this, and everybody will think you're smart. And that's really the way they think. It's stunning to me. Absolutely stunning. And when you see the kind of things I'm showing, they just can't be dismissed. They have no way to dismiss them. And these things are like a microscope, a very good microscope to see that. And here's what they are out on the giants were here. And and they made walls out of those tendon balls, and they left the straps, just broke them off. None of these things anybody can explain. And they've been looking at it for years, and this here, they're looking at that saying, wow, what's going on there? Well, I can tell you what, those are skin cells. And this is the Grand Canyon, and it was gouged out when we almost got hit by, I believe it was Venus. Might have something to do with Nibiru, I don't know. But a decree was made to wipe out humanity, I think at that time, but I don't know. I don't have the evidence to support that statement, but it could be. I certainly have the evidence to show that we had different species that are close to humans before the Great Flood, because these died in the Great Flood. So did the Sumerians engineer us? Maybe. You cannot dismiss this right now. It cannot be dismissed. That's a foot. There's no question whatsoever. And there were giants with feet that big. Absolutely stunningly large. And for us to just dismiss this out of hand, oh, that's got to be crazy, it's just too big, it's just too... I agree with all that stuff, but when you do have something you cannot dismiss, you cannot dismiss it. And that's the kind of educational system we have now, is dismiss what makes it them not be, the heroes, the geniuses here. They just dismiss whatever they want to dismiss. And I'm telling you right now, that is just a fact. In my opinion, academia has become fraud and usury of the students, and they are fiduciary failures. And the top universities are the absolute worst. That's my opinion. And it holds water, my friends. That's what I'm showing you here, to be dismissed out of hand and refused after DNA and CAT scans, chemistry, specimens coming out of your earlobes. And they can't explain not a single one of these things. Not a single one can be explained. And they refuse to discuss it because they know I'm right. And this is, to them, an assault. Well, truth is never an assault. Right? You hear me? Truth is never an assault. Denying truth is an assault. Truth is never an assault.